Wonderful. Thank you so much. And yes, Michael Cowling, who spoke yesterday, we're good friends, and I'm very pleased that he was able to present to your conference yesterday. I'm going to share my screen and then put it into slide mode. There we go. Look at that. Very good. So thank you very much for the very kind invitation to speak with you tonight. It's tonight for me in Australia. And just to give you a sense of where I am in Australia, I'm right up the very top there, where that little A symbol is. So right up the very top, it's lots of crocodiles up here. All right. Now, we've, of course, been dealing with AI now for a couple of years and have learnt many lessons over that time. I have a colleague in Canberra, which is the capital of Australia, and he has a son who's studying a Bachelor of Psychology and a Bachelor of International Relations at the Australian National University. Now, his son, who's a fourth-year student, said these things in a recent article that was written about generative AI. He says, the measures designed to stop cheating seem to satisfy universities, but in reality seem to provide only a cloak of additional protection to the AI-enhanced students, rendering them invisible to institutions keen to pretend everything is under control. And in many senses, we have not wanted to accept the challenges to higher education because it has been such a challenge to our thinking. And I hope today, that I will challenge your thinking in terms of the way in which we can conceive of education, and particularly higher education. He goes on to say in this article that in the current university environment, where consequences are meagre, where quizzes and exams are being made more difficult in the anticipation that some students will use AI, and where AI is such an overwhelming advantage, is it any surprise that students are frequently using AI, where there is such a clear disadvantage when they don't use it? The key there is that it is now becoming a disadvantage if students don't get to use AI in their studies. So it starts to become an equity issue. Lastly, he says, universities can try to equalise the playing field by completely banning AI. But usage by students is already so widespread, and universities are failing so spectacularly in their current attempts to control AI usage that this possibility seems impossible, which leaves only the options of accepting that honest students will get lower grades, or taking new measures to enable all students to use AI equally. And that is the challenge that we have, particularly with our students in Australia, getting the equitable use of artificial intelligence, because I imagine, like your own country, it's a vast country. There's large areas of the country that do not have particularly good internet. So this little presentation is going to talk through 5 or 6 main topics. That is, our traditional thinking is not necessarily the way to answer our future questions. There are some clear challenges for us moving forwards in relation to higher education and teaching. And I'm going to pose some questions and some statements to you that I would like you to respond to in the chat, if you wouldn't mind, in a minute. Also, what is happening in the Australian sector in relation to the use of different AI tools? We will look at that. And then I'm going to look at 10 priorities that I have developed for our university in relation to generative AI. Then we are going to look at some generative AI tools themselves, and particularly what we're doing in relation to changing assessment. Most of the images I have used in today's presentation are created with generative AI. And so I'm going to share a lot of points with you, but you'll see that this is very, very sophisticated. We see in Australia there are three main challenges, one of which is contract cheating. Now, that's not a new challenge, but it is a challenge that we continue to face here in Australia and overseas. So contract cheating, where students buy assignments from others. And there are many, many cheating sites. In fact, I get invitations because in my social media profile, I have the fact that I'm at a university. Cheating companies email me in my private email and on messaging to ask if they can sell me assignments or they can offer their writing services to me. Of course, I don't respond to those. We also have this notion of impersonation. That is where students pay other students to do their work for them. Now, that's different from cheating services because they do all the study for them. So in Australia, we have a lot of international students, and they come to Australia through third-party agents, and the universities have a relationship with those agents. Now, our quality agency, TEXA, the Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency, found that some agents aren't as reputable as others, and that they were selling educational opportunities to the students who are coming to Australia and offering, as part of that service, to have another person do the work for them. So they came to Australia on a visa, they had somebody do their studies for them, and then they just were able to work and make money while they were in Australia. That is a real thing. And obviously, we don't want that because that student, the real student, is giving away their personal data to these cheating services. And of course, more recently, we have the situation where generative AI has been used. Now, the cheating companies have been using generative AI for quite a while now to help generate their content. It's just now that it's become available to everyone. So the first question I want to ask you, and if you could make some comment in the chat, that'd be very nice. How much change have you made to your assessment over the last 12 months to account for ChatGPT or the like? If you could just take a sec to write in the chat what type of changes you have made to your assessment, or has it been a bit too early for you to make those changes? You're still trying to figure it out. Please just put some notes in the chat if you wouldn't mind, and so others can see what changes might have happened, what other people are doing. I'll go on now. This is a public forum called Reddit, and here is a student that has said in this forum, I deal with problems, so most of my semester was spent inside my room instead of school. My exam was coming in 3 days, and I knew none of my lectures. So the student had been studying all semester, or not, has been enrolled all semester, but had done nothing, not for the whole semester. So for 16 weeks, they had done nothing. They didn't listen to any lectures, but the lectures had been recorded. And so there were 12 weeks of lectures that were between 2 to 3 hours long. And they had 3 days before the exam. So they'd studied all semester, or not studied all semester, and they had to go through 12 lectures and all the materials, all the readings and things like that. So all the lectures were done on a recording system called Echo 360. We don't use that system, but other universities do here in Australia. And so he got the transcript, this student got the transcripts from the recordings and put them into ChatGPT and asked it to analyze the lectures. The first time they did it, that was too long, so he had to break that up into smaller chunks, so it won't accept more than 1,000 words. So these lectures were 7,000 to 8,000 words. So he had to break it up into smaller chunks to make that analysis. But from there, he was able to get a summary of this transcript, and he was able to highlight essential discussions that happened within the lecture. He asked ChatGPT to summarise that, and he was able to get the dot points from the main points in the lecture. He then spent 4 to 5 hours looking at that content, which went for equivalent to 24 to 30 hours of content. He spent 4 to 5 hours looking at that content. And then the next day, he spent another 4 or 5 hours summarising that for himself. So in all, he'd spent about 10 hours for the whole semester doing a summary of all the lectures. He then spent some time completely summarising all that information. He then scored 94% on the exam, despite him only studying for 3 days. So remember, it was 3 days before the exam. He thought he'd better do some study. He got 94%, and it was all thank you to ChatGPT that he got 94%, only having done 3 days of study and worked with the summaries. Now, my question is, has that student cheated? Now, I've posed that question to a lot of people over the last few months, and the answer is no, that student hasn't cheated. What that student has done has been very wise in the use of the tool, though it's not the way we as lecturers would like to see the tool used. Let's go on. As the Burning Glass Institute is a research institute here and in Australia, and they've done a lot of research in understanding how generative AI is used in the workforce. And they say, as skill needs shift, employee learning and development curricula will need to evolve in parallel. So we have to evolve our curriculum in parallel with the way employers are wanting to, the types of graduates employers want. Educational and training institutions will need to realign their offerings, focusing on fostering AI-centric skills and emphasizing the value of human-AI collaboration. Human-AI collaboration. So, we also know that one of the questions I have is, if I were an employer and I knew generative AI could help my workers be more productive, would I want them to use it? Well, I think, of course, I would want them to use it. If my business is going to be more productive because they are using AI, if I'm going to make more money because they're using generative AI to answer questions quickly and to do the work quicker, of course I want them to use it. Well, if I'm a lecturer at a university and I think that generative AI is going to make my students do their work better, would I want them to use it? Well, I think the same answer applies. Yes, of course, we would want our students to be using generative AI if we're using it in a way that will make them more productive. We know in Australia that as of the beginning of this year, all schools have access to generative AI and can use generative AI in school. And that's not dissimilar to other countries. But do we know what our industry are doing in generative AI? So PricewaterhouseCoopers, this image on the right-hand side, they did a study in July last year, and they found about 73% of all companies in the United States were using AI in some aspect of their business. So 73% of companies. Would 73% of our courses, our university courses, our vet courses, be using AI? I don't think they would be yet. And yet, 73% of all companies in the United States use AI, and I'm assuming in other countries too. So what are we using it for? How can we use it? Well, we're using it to be more productive. If we can use AI to understand all the information that is out there, that raises the bar in terms of the type of information we have access to. It means that the base level of information is raised and that we can use that base level of information to become more productive. It is, at the end of the day, generative artificial intelligence is a productivity tool. And we need to think of it as a productivity tool, not as a demon that is going to destroy higher education. We need to grapple with this to understand how it can be used in our favour to help make our students far more employable, particularly those 73% of companies who are already using AI. In other words, let the machines do what the machines do well, and let's train our students, that is prospective employers, to both master the machines and to extend or add value on what they can do so well. And that comes from a blog that I wrote last year. So, in terms of students can become creators, they can be producers. Students are not just empty vessels waiting to be filled. They have a brain. They've been using that brain for many, many years before they come to university. And so we need to be able to work with them to be creative. So AI provides us instant feedback on students' writing. It can simplify complex information for students. It can scaffold information on specific tasks. These are some of the things students really need help with. It can really be very helpful to neurodivergent students and those who have English as a second language. Extremely helpful for them. It also helps students who are struggling to understand concepts, and they can ask generative AI for examples to aid their understanding, and it will give them examples to help them unpack what we as lecturers are asking them to do. The use of AI by students pivots them to becoming consumers of learning materials, away from being consumers of learning materials to creators of new learning resources. So in a sense, we need to treat our students as partners in this process. We are not necessarily standing on the podium telling them all the information. The information is already there for them. What we have to do is help them to use that information productively and constructively. Now, Microsoft and tools like that, so many different companies are now producing generative AI tools. There's ChatGPT, of course. There's Bing Chat. There is Google Gemini. And these tools are essentially free. There are free versions, and of course there are paid versions. And they're useful for generating this initial content and ideas to help start to get to words on a page. Now, Microsoft, of course, have released their Copilot, which is ChatGPT 4 inside Office 365. And many universities are trying to come to terms with that. It's quite expensive for a university to implement that. And yet, my university hasn't implemented it yet, but we need to very quickly. But we do also have to take our responsibility very seriously in relation to the misuse of information. Misinformation is serious. And so we need to teach our students how to use it effectively. That means you also have to know how to use it effectively. And we cannot learn how to use it effectively if we're not using it ourselves. So we do need to be using those tools ourselves. So just as we teach our students to read critically and to evaluate and collaborate evidence and to distinguish good argument from bad argument and to recognize rubbish, so we need to do that with ChatGPT and to teach them how to do that. I was at a conference last year and where I was speaking, and this was a futurist thinker, and he was talking about artificial intelligence and the fact of right brain thinkers. And he was saying that let's use artificial intelligence for the menial and the mundane. So the left brain is where we do the menial and the mundane. So artificial intelligence, the machines, the robots can do that really well. Let's let them do that. On the other hand, let's use our brains, let's use our intellect, let's use our right brain thinking to make that meaningful and humane, to bring the human into the AI. So with that thinking, I generated 10 principles for Charles Darwin University, CDU, priorities for assessment. My first one is to reduce emphasis on high stakes exams. We know that generative AI and exams, we know generative AI can answer all the questions in most exams that we would offer. And particularly with online exams, that becomes really problematic. We need to reduce our propensity for widespread use of quizzes, particularly for important assessments. Now, self-help quizzes just to understand the information are good, but in terms of examination and quizzes, that is problematic, unless it's in a human invigilated situation where all the students are sitting in the room with the lecturer watching on. We need to look for opportunities for course-wide assessment, program-wide assessment. That is, so in Australia, a student does a degree, they do 24 subjects or 24 units across their degree, an undergraduate degree. That takes them 3 years, or 3 or 4 years, up to 5 years. They do 24 units. Now, most teachers teach their unit and don't have a great sense of what other units are teaching. What we need to do with generative AI, particularly, is to see assessment building on one another from one course of study to the next, program-wide assessment. I'll come back to that thought a bit later. We also need to weight our assessment items to align with the level of learning in our assessment. So alignment across units, and the low stakes assessment get low marks. So let's not mix up the marks with the weight of the assessment, which is something we tend to do a little bit here. Increased emphasis on formative assessment. That is assessment that builds knowledge, and assessment feedback. So feedback for learning. So the feedback we can give our students helps them learn. Feedback literacy, that is. So that's one of the priorities I have. It's designing more active assessment, more collaborative and authentic assessments within our curriculum. I'll deal with that a little bit later in this presentation. It means that I and my colleagues need to think about how we increase the level of work integrated learning and to group and peer assessment. Now, most students don't like this thought of group work, but that's exactly what they're going to be doing when they're in the workforce. In most cases, they're going to be working in groups of people. Now, the reason they don't like group work is because we make it very contrived. But the more we can make it like a real world situation. So for example, if I'm teaching management, let's set up my class as a boardroom. And so have people take roles within that boardroom and pretend to be the treasurer or the principal or whatever it might be. Let them role play other roles so they can start to understand how those roles think. That makes it more fun for them and more real for them, more authentic for them. We need to think about assessment for inclusion. That means that includes other perspectives in life, other disciplines, and other peoples with different abilities. So some people have various disabilities. We need to have assessment that incorporates those elements. That's a whole range of thought in itself there. I need to be looking at ways in which I can create more multimodal assessments. That is, assessments that just aren't written on pieces of paper or typed on a computer, but using images, using voice, and bringing those together into presentations and things like that. That's how our students will be working in the workplace. And particularly in the note with ChatGPT, we need to be reducing the amount of long form text that reduces the opportunity for cheating. It's much harder to cheat in multimodal forms of assessment than it is to cheat in an essay. So, if we're thinking about continuing this notion of authentic assessment, it's about the way we design assessment to be relevant to the student's future career. That's our value proposition now. It's how the students, I know for decades we've said, no, we want to teach students how to learn. Well, that's fine, but the times have changed. We are now needing to train our students for the workforce and for particular roles within workforces. We do that in nursing and we do that in psychology. So we need to be thinking in terms of the future career of the student. So similarly, remember that question I asked early on. If I was an employee, wouldn't I want my people to be using generative AI? Well, yes. So by contextualizing our assessment tasks and linking this to their development, we encourage learners to engage with their future. So let's not fool ourselves. Students will turn to the use of artificial intelligence when things start to get tough. So additional strategies are needed, and I'm going to talk through some of those additional strategies. For a number of years now, there have been things on the internet that says the college essay is dead, that we need to be moving away from essays and things like that. Then to some degree that's right. I mean, for example, my wife is a psychologist. She's been a psychologist for 30 plus years. When she went through her psychology degree, she wrote probably, she's got a doctorate in psychology. She's a doctor of psychology, but she would have done 30, 40 essays in the time she did her studies. Since leaving study, she has never written an essay. Most people don't write essays in the workforce. They might write reports and other things, but they don't write essays. So why are we getting our students to write essays all the time as opposed to more constructive things that would align with what they might be doing in the workforce? So we need to think about supplementing some of the essays. I'm not saying get rid of essays. Of course, I'm not saying don't do essays. What I'm saying is we need to mix it up a bit more. That not every, if I go into a course, many of the courses at our university, I'll see quiz, 1,500 word essay, 3,000 word essay. That'll be their assessment. Quiz, essay, essay. That can't be the case in the future because students will do that over and over again. How boring is that? So let's think about supplementing our essays with other forms of assessment that incorporate new forms of assessment design, which we are talking about here. So that means breaking up our assessments into oral communication and using other valued skills across our professions. So we need to understand what our professions are doing. And that adds value to the student experience. So writing skills are not poised to become less. We clearly still need to know how to write. But what we're going to be doing is learning how to write with the aid of generative artificial intelligence, because that is going to give us the opportunity to build on the base level, as I mentioned before. One of the things that is very popular here in Australia and is starting to take off as a way of mitigating against generative AI in many cases is the notion of interactive oral assessments, being a more authentic and integral alternative to examinations. So the lecturer having a conversation with the student. Now you might think, oh, but that's going to take too much time. Well, if I've got a traditional essay, which might be the first part of the a traditional exam, first part might be multiple choice questions. The second part would be open-ended questions where they're writing short essays and things like that. It takes me 45 minutes to mark that exam and to read and to mark it properly and to give feedback. If I was to do an interactive oral with that student, it wouldn't take me 45 minutes. It might take me 30 minutes at a maximum. I would save 15 minutes of my workload by doing an interactive oral assessment as opposed to marking and providing feedback in the exam. Because in the interactive oral assessment, I'm giving feedback as I go. I don't have to then go and write the feedback down. It's recorded and the student gets that. So that's one form that is starting to gain a lot of traction here in Australia. So let's talk about balanced assessments. So pen and paper exams are back. So when COVID came, we all went to virtual exams in Australia here. And so we did a lot of work working with online invigilation companies. Now that COVID is not what it was, it's some would say post-COVID, I wouldn't say quite yet, but we are shifting, that we shifted away exams. Now we're starting to come back into the classroom. Now that's fine for our metropolitan universities. And so the big universities in Australia and Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, where their student body are mostly on campus, that's fine. You can bring students back in. But my university has about 70% of their students study remote from Darwin, where I live. A lot of distance. We specialise in distance education. And so we have to think about other forms of assessment other than the invigilated in-person exam, because we can't bring people here or from hundreds and hundreds of kilometres away. So this is where the VIVAs, or those oral assessments, become really important, because it means that our students have to understand and communicate the ideas and need to defend their ideas. Now, this can be done around a quiz. So you could still do a quiz, but then test some of the ideas with a VIVA. So your exam could still be a quiz, but the VIVA could be testing, or the oral exam could be testing what they did in their quiz. And so again, you don't have to mark that long form writing. Assignments that ask for deep research, that is not just the stuff that you can get easily from the internet, but to reference, and I'll go into that a bit more when I'm talking about using ChatGPT, that those ones that seek deep research are relatively ChatGPT agnostic. But let's look at some of the tools that are being used around the sector here in Australia particularly. This is a tool called Cite AI. It is very good at referencing. So, you know, ChatGPT is not fantastic at referencing. Gemini is not great at referencing. So the student will ask for references and they hallucinate. They give you references that aren't real. But this one will give you real references, and it is very good at referencing. So students are starting to use this tool called Cite AI. There also is another one very similar to that, which is very good at extracting data and synthesizing data and data fields, and being used by a number of universities, and that's called elicit.com. Very good tool. Llama, which is comes out of the Meta stable, that is Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, that stable. Llama is Meta's version of this, similar to ChatGPT. It's not as, I don't particularly like this one, but it's being used by a number of students who are very much into Meta. Gemini is the new replaced Bard. Gemini is a very good tool. The paid version is very good. The free version is probably similar to ChatGPT 3.5, but a very good tool, and many students are using that. And the reason it's good is because it's multimodal. So it will not just do text, it will also create audio or video and images. Not video, but images. You can get other tools to create the images as well. Then there is another tool called Jurassic 2 we're starting to see being used. And that's also very good at producing specific language models around thousands of different languages and things like that. So if you want to do it in other languages other than English, it's very good for that. Claude 3 is a new version of Claude 2. Claude 2 is good, but Claude 3 is even better. This is a very good tool. It's only been out for a few months now. Mind you, ChatGPT 5 is not far away either. But Claude 3 here, it performs complex cognitive tasks that go way beyond deep patterns. It goes very deep patterns of recognition, and it can transcribe voice into text like ChatGPT 4 can, but does it very well. It can translate handwritten notes. It can translate graphs. It can tell you what's happening in a photograph. It can start creating websites in HTML, so it can create your HTML websites for you and cascading style sheets. Can turn images into structured JSON data, and can debug complex code bases as well. So it can translate various languages also in real time. So it could translate me speaking Russian to you if I'd set it up. So I would be speaking in English, it would translate to Russian as it went. So that's how sophisticated Claude is. And it is, when you compare it to the other tools, it does better than all the other tools do on a comparison across major tests, major tests that are offered around the globe. And so at this point, Claude 3, the paid version, the premium version, is doing very well in all these particular tests. And we're seeing these charts come out across the sector, more and more of things happening. Now, what we are also seeing students do is what we call app smashing. App smashing. That means that they're using more than one tool to do their work. So they might generate something in ChatGPT. They then bring it into a tool like this one called Grammarly, which helps them change the grammar to rewrite sentences. So they get the content from ChatGPT, they put it into Grammarly, and it changes it up for them. Then they take it into a third tool, which is something like this one called Quillbot, which is also a writing assistance tool. Now, by the time a student has taken it from ChatGPT into Grammarly, into Quillbot, there is not a detection system on earth that will find that it has been generated by generative AI. It is completely ambivalent to that. So Turnitin or these other tools will not know that generative AI has been used to create it because it changes it so much from the content that was originally created by ChatGPT. That's fascinating. It's called app smashing. And so we're seeing students use more and more of these apps in concert with each other, together. So here's another couple of tools just before I finish up on the tools we're seeing. We're seeing these quiz tools. So that is, I have this plugin into my browser. It will read the questions in a quiz and give me the answers. So all I do is circle the question, as in here, I'm circling the question, and it will give me the answer to that question. And that's being used by students all over the place. Oh, in that case, let's do some reflection instead of quizzes. Well, there's a beautiful tool for reflection as well. It's called Riff. Now, Riff helps a student create a reflection. Now, it's using generative AI to help them, prompt them to, and it's quite a good tool. It helps them to work through their reflection. I quite like this tool. It helps students process that reflection and then give it as part of their assessment. But let's do the maths on this. So if I was a student and if I subscribed to 3 of those tools, for example, so I could do my app smashing, as it were, it would cost me maybe $60 a month to do that. Now, if that $60 a month saved me 10 hours of work a week, then I'd be on top, because if I worked those 10 hours a week, that's 40 hours a month I could be working. And the minimum wage in Australia is $23.23. And if I worked for those 40 hours a month, I would earn $929, and minus tax would be $280 in tax. Minus the $60 that I paid for to buy those generative AI tools once a month, I would be $589 better off just by subscribing to 3 of those tools. It would save me all the time, and I could make money on the side. So let's then look at some ways in which we can set some of our assessments to be a bit more complex and to understand the use of generative AI within these. So maybe we should ask our students to include some personal experiences in their perspectives in their writing. Now, ChatGPT can't do the personal particularly well, so I'm going to give that a green light. That's good. I can ask students to be more personal and provide experiences. We could ask them to analyse some class discussions. So if we're in a situation in a room with our students or in an online room, we could ask them to summarise that class discussion. Now, if we're in the online space, of course, they could download this transcript and put that through generative AI. So I'll give that an amber light. It's not quite a green light, but in the in-class situation, it would be a green light, but in the virtual space, it's a bit more of an amber light. And remembering our institution, 70% of our students are distant, so a lot of that's done online. Maybe we could use it to untangle complex instructions and get them to use it to untangle complex instructions. But in doing that, we do that in such a way that we test it first. So we put it into ChatGPT ourselves and test it to find out that they and find topics that ChatGPT will not work on too well. So we know that these engines are improving all the time, so I'll give that an amber light at the moment. But if we get our students to write about a very recent event, that is something that's happened in the last week, so they apply the principles you're teaching them, but apply them to a recent event. We know ChatGPT, particularly ChatGPT 3.5 and the free versions, have no idea about those recent events because they're locked. Those databases are locked down. The more expensive versions may know about it, but in most cases they don't know about very recent events. So if we get students to apply the principles we're teaching them to recent events, ChatGPT will not be able to do it, or neither will other generative AI. So I'm going to give that a green light. But we always must test it first. For essays, we can provide them with the readings up front, and particularly those in the university databases that we have. Now, of course, some of the paid versions, we can put the PDF into it and it can summarize it. So I'm only going to give that an amber light at the moment. But it is always better to use ones that sit behind firewalls. So from journals that sit behind firewalls, if we're going to be doing something with essays. It's harder for them to get it. It takes much more time for the students to do it, and they haven't always got the time to do it. So what we can also do is get our students to submit the Word version. If you're using Microsoft, I don't know if you use Microsoft Word, but if you're using Microsoft Word, you can get them to deposit their version onto a shared drive, like the Office 365 drive, OneDrive or something like that. And you can see the history in the document. So if they submit it to a learning management system, you lose that history. But if they're submitting it in the drive, if they place it in the drive and they submit the URL, you can see the history in that document. You can see that if they've just copy and pasted everything into the document, or they've actually built it over a period of time. So that's one way we can check that they're doing it in Word. And then we can always ask them to reflect on the process through 300 words or 500 word reflection on the learning activity itself. So it's not just doing the essay, but it's also doing a reflection on what they learned from doing the essay. So I'm going to give those last two a green light. So multiple choice questions. I've already talked about how that can be problematic, but we can also present our images so we can also present our questions as images or figures or charts or some other auxiliary information that ChatGPT can't necessarily, or ChatGPT can't, but other tools might be able to, but ChatGPT can't analyze the images particularly well. For example, I could say in this image, what section of this image below demonstrates something? ChatGPT can't do that. Others can, but those students can't necessarily afford those other tools. So I'm going to give that a green light at this point. May change in the future. We can present auxiliary visuals or hotspot questions. So most learning management systems allow for hotspot questions, or use H5P and things like that. So select the area of the image that shows something. Very good in biology questions and things like that. So I'm going to give that a green light too at the moment, though it's changing. It's all changing very quickly. We present questions using video, so we can have questions inside videos that they can respond to. And at points in the video, they have to stop and reflect and answer the questions that have been in the video previously. Of course, they could download the transcript and things, but that would be very time consuming as opposed to listening to it. So at this point, again, I'm going to give that a green light. Maybe we could present questions that require the student to apply a concept or a principle. Remember, I talked about this notion of the current event. This is where we're asking them to apply those principles. I won't repeat that one. I'm going to give that one a green light. Maybe we give the student the answer to the question and ask them to write the question. There's a thought. We could flip it. So we write the answer to the question, give them the answer, and ask them to give us a range of questions that could be used to get to that answer. And another tool we use, I'm giving that a yellow light, an amber light at the moment, because that's not, some of the paid versions can do that quite well too. But this one I like, and it's something we're very used to. It's peer review. But what we have, we use a tool called Feedback Fruits here at this university, and allows students to review each other's work. So we could get students to go off to ChatGPT, write their essay and things like that, but get other students to peer review it. So not only are they seeing the work that they have done, so they peer review two other students' work, they are exposed to the work of two other students. And so they're getting not only the concepts that they have talked about themselves, but they're seeing how other students have done dealt with those same topics. An excellent way in which to process information. I'm giving that a green light at this point. But let's take advantage of AI shortcomings. So ChatGPT is not good at providing sources at this point. They're rubbish. And so we can work with that. So we encourage students to, in their writing practices, to focus on correcting factual errors. So ChatGPT will provide errors. So we're using that, we're getting them to use it, but getting them to correct the errors and to find the resources that might support, the real resources that might support it. So they have to go and do that research. We're asking students to cite and reference their work, so with proper citations, which they go and find, and they have to make sure that they're aligning to the text that they're doing. Now, again, that can be problematic sometimes with the newer tools, but still it's worth a amber light. And we could get them to be critiquing and write the critique around what ChatGPT has done and produced. And so they're having to find alternative arguments. And that's a good way of finding the alternative arguments. Now, let's think about programmatic assessment. I mentioned that earlier, and we have to think in terms of students do a unit of study, a course of study, and they might be learning one or two skills through that study. And so that lecturer is doing that course, but the students are also potentially doing 4 units a semester. And so they're doing all these different skills within the semester. But what we're doing is we're charting that into something like an e-portfolio with them. So they can start to align those skills to their program of study. So they can start to see themselves emerging as professionals with the skills that they're attaining throughout their degree. Now, this is not a new concept, but it is a concept as we start to think in terms of program-wide assessment that can allow students to make those connections on their assessments from one unit to another. Instead of us treating them as individual assessments, we build on those assessments across, and we can align a capstone unit with that in the end of their studies.
Just student equity issues. So we understand that in Australia, first-year students from schools, so not all students come to university straight from school. If you have come straight from school, you've come with a bit of a head start. You've been using ChatGPT in school or one of those other tools in school already. Those who have come back into study from the workforce may not have been using those tools. So there's an equity issue there. There has been a digital divide at this moment. There's a digital divide with AI, and both around the level of access and the level of skills. So we need to be conscious of that as lecturers. Staff and students need to be capable with AI models and the better models, the ChatGPT 4, and not the free ones. We need to actually be using the better ones. Now, our universities have been very slow to fund that for us. So many have had to fund it ourselves, which we're not happy about. But we need to be able to use those better tools to understand what they're doing. But of course, we've got these things that do AI detection. They don't do a very good job at now. They've started off well, but now the databases have grown so much and the AI databases have grown so much, they're not really picking up the AI very well at all now. And so the detection algorithms they use have become less helpful. So those who don't have so we know that some students are paying for the full versions, the paid versions, others aren't. So they've got a different experience. And so that is problematic for our students. It's like a student having a textbook that's 10 years old as opposed to having a textbook that came out yesterday. There's differences in the quality of the information, the currency of the information. That's what we're facing with ChatGPT 3.5 and ChatGPT 4. The difference in the information is so much more in the paid versions. So it's more equitable to provide them access to capable models. That isn't cheap. But do they have to buy the same textbooks as they used to? That's a lot of money. A textbook in Australia could cost $150. ChatGPT doesn't cost that much for the year. So maybe we have to rethink the types of resources our students have had. So it's more equitable to access for them and give them the opportunity to access that as opposed to having to pay for some of the textbooks they might pay for. Our TEXA, our Tertiary Education Quality Standards Agency, produced this. Now, I'm sure Michael Cowling would have pointed you towards this yesterday, the assessment reform in the age of generative AI. Michael was involved in the production of this, as was I. It's an excellent publication from our quality agency, and it emphasises that assessment should be appropriate, should emphasise appropriate, authentic engagement with AI, that it should be looking at, as I've talked about, programmatic wide assessment across the disciplines. It should look at the process of learning, not just the digestion of information, but that process of learning. Should look at opportunities for students to work with appropriate AIs for their disciplines. And it also, we need to think about security and meaningful points of access across the programs, and particularly in relation to informed decision-making about the progression and completion of assessments. One thing that is not what we do not want to see is students putting unassessed work and lecturers putting unassessed work or unassessed research, unpeer-reviewed research into the open tools. If it hasn't been, that's a no-no. ChatGPT doesn't know if it wrote your student's assignment, and it doesn't know that it doesn't know, and it doesn't care. ChatGPT doesn't care if it's peer-reviewed, not peer-reviewed. It's information. It digests that information. If we're putting unsolicited work into ChatGPT and it's consuming it as an open AI model, we cannot allow students to be putting their work into open models. We need to be able to provide them the opportunity to use closed models. So let's get started. Staff need to be using these more expensive models, unfortunately, I'm sorry to say. We need to be benchmarking what other universities are doing around us, and that's underway in our particular situation. We're benchmarking other universities. We need to be starting to use it on a day-to-day basis. I need to be using it on a day-to-day basis, and I need to train my staff how to use it. We can't train our students well if we haven't learned to use it ourselves. And we need to establish things like, if we haven't got an academic integrity unit within our university, we need to be looking at how we can establish an academic integrity unit that helps the lecturers deal with this so they're not left to deal with it themselves. And we also need to explore further the ethical implications aside of all this. So I found this image of one of the sports you do over there. Now, the person at yesterday's win in this particular competition will not necessarily win tomorrow's competition. So just because this person won this competition doesn't mean they're going to win the next competition they play in. And just the same, last year's assessments will not beat today's generative AI. We need to be doing things and keep on top of the game. Based on that, what changes are you going to make in your curriculum? Maybe take a sec to just, I'm going to put up the next slide, which is just some of the references I've used. But just take a sec to put in the chat. Now that you've heard all this, what are you going to take an action now? Take an action and write in the chat what you are going to do about this in your course, in your teaching. What are you going to do tomorrow? What will you do tomorrow to help yourself and your students deal with generative AI better? Just take a sec, put in the chat for yourself here. What are you going to do tomorrow in your course, in your unit of study with your students? What are you going to do tomorrow? And here are just some of the references I've used. And I'm going to finish that presentation and come back to the room.
Спасибо огромное.
Thank you very much, Professor Sankey. This has been a deep dive in assessment, and I have had a feeling when you said, what do we have to change and what do we have to envisage? And every single time I wanted to think, to say, this is what we're having today, but what's coming tomorrow? So ChatGPT has been announced to be able to communicate with other chats. So this will fully integrate all of our conversations, and changes come every single day.
Yes.
So what do we have to get ready for and what we have to review? This is an open question for discussion for the entire global community, and we are very happy to do it at our webinar. And now coming back to the questions from our chat. And the first one was a very interesting comment, and I'm really thankful to our participant named Tamara for asking this. Do you remember we discussed cheating when a student saved time and money? Thank you very much for the calculus. You've made an estimate of doing this business. Well, certainly the majority of our students do not cheat, and Tamara writes, I believe the truth is somewhere near. This guy studied key information, and this detailed information will hardly be available in the long term. And when people pursue this practice, they are decapacitated to process large volumes of information, and they lose this ability of systematizing information and making its summary. Do you think this is a right understanding of this?
I think that there is so much information that part of the solution is to help our students process the right way of understanding the outputs they get. So to do that, they need to be learning how to prompt the AI engines appropriately. Now, that means I have to understand how to prompt an AI engine appropriately. I mentioned that it is a productivity tool. There is so much information out there. We need to learn how to extract that information to make what we do become productive. So it's not typing in a prompt and just getting the answer. It's being able to tease out the information you want. And that can take quite a while and takes a bit of skill. And so there are a number of people around who provide information about appropriate prompting. I have a colleague, a lecturer in my group who reports to me, who has done a lot of work on understanding prompting. So we've heard of these people called prompt engineers who are specialising in how to prompt generative AI tools to get the best information out of those tools. That is part of the skill, that is part of the digital fluency, the AI fluency that we need to develop. If we don't develop that, that is going to give us, that's going to give me, it's going to get students a competitive edge when they go to get the job, that I know how to prompt generative AI appropriately to get the information I need to help me be productive.
Спасибо. Вы знаете, есть такое мнение.
Thank you. Our opinions have our participants express their opinions that if teachers become jobless because of generative AI, they can become very efficient prompt engineers, because this is what we do daily. We ask questions, we rephrase, we have our teaching methodologies, and certainly mastering this prompt engineering skill would be the easiest task for us. But it's a joke, of course, but still. Another question. Right now, I study how to use generative AI in the educational process. Do you have a methodology of using generative AI, a course for the teachers of digitalization or informatization? Do you have anything like that?
We have discipline courses. So in our computing, so what we're working with our lecturers to do is to embed the use of generative AI in their disciplines. So how is a nurse going to use generative AI is different to how an engineer will use generative AI, is different to how an accountant will use generative AI, is different to how a lawyer will use generative AI. So there's no one course that will do that. What we are doing is working with our lecturers so they understand what is happening in industry. What are the lawyers out there in practice doing? And that's how we have to feed that back into the courses that we're teaching. Now, we're in the process, we haven't finished it yet. We're making a micro-credential to teach that our staff can do as part of a graduate certificate of education. So many lecturers have a degree or doctorate in engineering, but have never studied education. So, and that is the case not just in Australia, but in some other countries too. So they haven't learned how to teach necessarily. They've learned how to teach by being taught. And so how they teach is generally the way they were taught. Same with me when I started teaching. I taught in the way that I learned and how the teachers taught me to learn. So I taught that way too. I hadn't studied education at that point. I did some study in education, a lot of study in education, and now have changed the way I teach. And so what we are doing, we have a graduate certificate in tertiary teaching, which we ask our teachers to do who don't have a teaching qualification. So they do a small numbers of units to learn how to teach. So we do an induction in teaching, and then we teach them different skills. We teach them about authentic assessment. We teach them about generative AI. We teach them about other forms of, anyway, lots of different things we teach them around different ways of teaching and learning, how to use video, how to use the LMS appropriately, how to use Microsoft Teams as opposed to discussion forums in the LMS. So all kinds of things we teach them. And so, and that's usually in micro bits. And so they are learning lots of little bits and putting their puzzle together as far as teaching. And so that's what we've developed many of those courses, and we have an ongoing professional development program around that. So I and some of my colleagues have run many short courses on generative AI over the last 2 years, but are now formalizing that into a micro-credential. Now we've been doing it for a while.
Спасибо огромное. И в продолжение этого вопроса...
Thank you very much. And in the follow-up, there's another question. Who designs those programs? Is it a special unit to design any programs to study and to introduce generative AI in the teaching and learning process? So who takes care of that at your university?
So that is done in partnership with, so I have working for me 6 instructional designers, educational designers, and a number of staff who produce media assets. I have a number of academic staff who run the workshops for us. And so they work together to develop the materials. We bring in some outside experts as well to bolster that. And it's in partnership. So if we are doing a workshop with our nursing students, we will bring in a nursing lecturer with one of our instructional designers, our educational designers, and they will work together to develop up the appropriate content, how to use generative AI within nursing together.
Спасибо. И такой вопрос...
Thank you. We understand that you don't have a definite figure, but generally, what is the percentage of your lecturers, of your professors, use generative AI in their work? Do you have any feeling of the figure?
Not enough, but I would say we did a survey. We sent out a survey last week to our staff. We sent out a survey last year, and only about 13% had used it. This was in July last year. 13% had been using it. We're seeing the figures now at about 30% of people who are feeding it into their, have wound it into their units, their courses, and that is growing. So we'd anticipate by the end of the year, we'll probably have about 40%, and we'll continue to grow that number over the years.
Спасибо огромное.
Thank you very much. Indeed, this is really great that there are teams working on introducing generative AI in the educational process. It's great that you have been thinking of this, and you gave food for thought for our participants, and I believe that they will also adapt your approaches in their work, and they will utilize this. We really appreciate this meeting with you. Thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing your materials with us so generously. And now we would like to say that thank you very much, sir. Thank you.